Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Executive Editor for Dataversity. We'd like to thank you for joining today's Dataversity webinar, Unlock Business Value Through Reference and MDM, this year's October edition in a monthly series called Data Ed Online with Dr. Peter Aiken, brought to you in partnership with Data Blueprint. Now let me give the floor to Megan Jacobs, the webinar organizer from Data Blueprint, to introduce our speaker and today's webinar. Megan,
Thanks,
hello.
Shannon. Oh, hi. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Megan Jacobs, and I'm the webinar coordinator here at Data Blueprint. We are pleased that you found the time to join us for today's webinar on Unlock Business Value Through Reference and MDM. As always, a big thank you goes out to Shannon and Dataversity for hosting us. We'll get started in just a few moments after I let you know about some housekeeping items and introduce our presenter. We have 1 hour for the presentation, followed by 30 minutes of Q&A. We'll try to answer as many questions as time allows, but feel free to submit questions as they come up throughout the session. And to answer the top 2 most commonly asked questions, yes, you will receive an email with links to download today's materials and any other information you request during the session within the next 2 business days. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We've set up the hashtag DataEd on Twitter, so if you're logged on, feel free to use it in your tweets and submit your questions and comments that way. And we'll keep an eye on the Twitter feed and include any answers to those questions in our post-session email. Now, let me introduce you to our presenter. Peter Aiken is an internationally recognized data management thought leader. Many of you already know him or have seen him at conferences worldwide. He has more than 30 years of experience and has received many awards for his outstanding contributions to the profession. Peter is also the founding director of Data Blueprint. He has written dozens of articles and 8 books, and the most recent is Monetizing Data Management. Peter's experience is more than 500 data management practices in 20 countries and consistently named as a top data management expert. Some of the most important and largest organizations in the world have sought out his and Data Blueprint's expertise. Peter has spent multi-year immersions with groups as diverse as the U.S. Department of Defense, Deutsche Bank, Nokia, Wells Fargo, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and Walmart. He often appears at conferences and is constantly traveling. Peter, where are you headed this week?
So this week we're headed off to Australia for the first Australian Data Management Conference in a couple of years, and I'll get to travel a bunch of hours and spend 3 days there next week. It should be a lot of fun. Hi, everybody, and thanks, Megan. Thanks, Shannon. It's good to see everybody again. Today our topic is reference and master data management. It's real important that you understand the differences between the 2 of these, and as you see later on in the webinar, these IT initiatives have no more success than any of the others that we do. That just means that if somebody in your organization is proposing that you approach this process using this set of technologies, you need to be knowledgeable about its strengths and weaknesses, what it can do, and also what it won't necessarily do. And that's what we're going to try to cover today. As always, we'll dive through, first of all, a data management overview to get us all on the same sheet of paper. Then we'll look specifically at reference and MDM type definitions in there, and we'll talk about why the 2 of them are important. It is important to think about the 2 of these together. They, however, as I said, are not the same thing at all in this. Then we'll take a look at some building blocks in those areas, guiding principles, best practices, and then finish up with some takeaways, references, and, of course, your Q&A, which is always the most fun part about what we do. Hopefully this wheel is getting to be very familiar to you all. This is our DM Bach wheel. I'd ask, if I was in the audience, for you to raise your hands if you hadn't seen it, and we're having fewer and fewer people who are not seeing it. The goal here is to define what we mean by the body of knowledge for data management, and you can see I've highlighted in the bottom right-hand corner about 5 o'clock the reference and master data management section of the DM Bach. As always, the DM Bach also pays attention to other non-technical issues because they are as, if not more important than the technical issues that we'll talk about in here. And you can grab a copy of the DM Bach by Amazon. Just go to Amazon and type in DM Bach, and it will come right up for you. Then I would also ask if we had anybody in the audience here who was certified as a CDMP, joining about 1,200 individuals that we have worldwide in this area, and coming up with a designation now where we're starting to see at the bottom of the job requisitions, CDMP preferred, meaning they will give preferential treatment to somebody who has demonstrated knowledge, skills, and ability in this area. Moving on here, this is our standard chart for what we mean by data management. It's a little bit complex to do in a very quick webinar here, so we'll show you the management version of it. These are 5 interrelated data management practice areas. First one is data program coordination. It's to make sure that we manage data coherently. The second one is sharing data across organizational boundaries, whether that means from one program to another, from one part of our organization to another part of our organization, or between our organization and our partner organizations. Most data occurs in an unshared, ungoverned, unresponsible mode of doing this. Our third then piece, again in a related data management practice area, is data stewardship. And while it's fine to say things like everybody is responsible for data until we make it personally responsible, and it says, Peter, your next raise will depend on the following improvements in the data area, nothing tends to happen, because everybody thinks everybody else is taking care of it. So this is assigning responsibilities for data and making it personal. Our fourth area then is engineering data delivery systems, and this is the idea that we have, in many cases, many options to deliver data through to our various delivery partners. This can include things like XML portals and virtualization, as well as what we've been teaching people for the past 20 years, which is relational database management technologies. And of course, we're eventually moving into bigger and bigger data management technologies. Some people are shortening that phrase to big data. You really should speak about big data technologies. It changes the conversation and focuses it where it should be on the technological aspects of what happens there. Our fifth area then is to maintain data availability, and this is the idea that you can't simply drive these technologies off the lot. Just like a car, they have to have fluids added and regular maintenance performed on them. If we don't do this, then they tend not to be sustainable. So back to our original chart with a couple of other pieces added to it now. You can use this to take away and talk about these 5 areas. There's one more point here before we leave this chart, though, and that is that all of these areas have to work at the same level of organizational maturity. In other words, if I have 1 and 2 as the performance levels in this chart, which is typical of most organizations, then those areas will all be dragged down to the level of 1. In other words, it's a weak link in the chain model. The chain can only be as strong as the weakest link. So you need to have all 5 of these areas working simultaneously to make certain that these things will occur at the level that is appropriate for your organization. So again, that's our overview of data management. In here, let's move on now and talk about reference and MDM. And just like all of the chapters in the DMBOK, we have a chapter header here that we show as an IPO diagram. That's an input, process, or activities diagram, and then outputs on the right-hand side. Again, you can see the inputs have categories of input suppliers and participants, lots of different folks that are involved in this. We have some activities that we'll go through, again, 1 through 10 there. We have some technologies that we use underneath them, and we have our outputs, the primary deliverables being, in this case, the various types of requirements, and we'll look at those as well. You can see that the goals here are to provide authoritative source of reconciled, high-quality master and reference data, reducing the complexity and cost through reuse and leverage strategies, and supporting for business intelligence and information integration efforts. So let's move on here now. Again, Gartner holds that MDM is not a technology, but that it is a discipline or a strategy. It is where business and the IT organization work together to ensure the uniformity, accuracy, semantic persistence, that means the meanings perpetuate, stewardship, and accountability of the enterprise's official shared master data. Now, if you're working in an organization, a really good question to ask of people who are trying to advocate for master data is to say to them the following question: can you tell me precisely what rule you're going to use to determine whether any individual piece of data is in fact master or reference or not master? In other words, if I'm looking at a transaction in there, we should be able to clearly identify it as such, transactional data, versus something that is master in nature. And of course, you then definition of what we mean by master. That is, master data is the enterprise's official, consistent set of identifiers, extended attributes, and hierarchies. In other words, this starts just to work towards our definition of enterprise architecture as the official vocabulary of the organization. The identifiers are the things that need to be identified in the organization. For example, if I'm working in a trucking organization, trucks might have identifiers, and those truck identifiers might comprise the master data for that organization. Most importantly, this is going to be organization specific. So you need to look at your organization and decide what are the things that could be usefully attacked with this discipline or strategy of master data management. Let's look at a couple of examples on this. Parties are one of the examples, as in whom are we dealing business with? Customers, prospects, people, citizens, employees, vendors, suppliers, trading partners, whatever it is that we're looking for to try and find these particular groups. Places, locations, offices, regional alignments, geographies, different parts of the world, and things, accounts, assets, policies, products, services. All of these things go into the strategy that you use to develop around master data. The key for this is that when we're looking at these various things, we want to have them in one place and one place only, because they are more important than the transactional data in the relative scheme of things, particularly as defined in an information architecture. So when we talk about the parties, places, and things of the organization, that is not good enough. You need to have a couple of examples of each one as you're working into this to help your organization understand this. And if you have trouble identifying it at this level, then the organization is probably not ready to spend any money on these master data management initiatives. So I would contend that a necessary but insufficient condition for success of MDM is to recognize that it is a discipline or a strategy and not a technology, that it probably has to be implemented with some examples around some things that are important for your organization. And most importantly, it is never successful when it's implemented as a technology initiative by itself. You probably need at least two other spokes on the DM block, and I'll show you an example later on with quality and governance, which are two important ones. I can truthfully say that I've never seen MDM work where it's not been implemented with at least a quality component in order to do that. So again here, what we're looking at is a discipline or a strategy that is the official set of identifiers, that these identifiers typically evolve around the concepts of party, places, and things, and more importantly, you need to make sure the people who are proposing these things have this well of an understanding, because if they don't have this good of an understanding, they're spending money unnecessarily and prematurely. Now, the concept of MDM started with the idea of software development, which may or may not be a good idea, because software development actually isn't done very well in most organizations. Again, from a chaos theory perspective or a Standish Group analysis, what this means is that we typically have 1/3 of our projects occurring full implementation within the delivery schedule and with full functionality, and the 2/3 of our projects are challenged on one or more of those other dimensions. When we, however, send software out, and again, you can think of Microsoft as doing this because they generally do a pretty good job. When they send Windows 8.1 updates out, it's the release to manufacturing version. It's the one they stamp all the CDs of. They call it going gold or going golden on this. Many people confuse this with a master from the recording, which is what we make all the rest of the records from on this. In data management, this means the correct value to the business question. Now, the reason this is important for businesses is because our studies show us that the average organization has 17 places where they maintain customer data in their organization. I was working with a group yesterday, and they said they started out with 5 different places. They were above average. Their problem of reconciling these to a golden version of their master data for their customers was much easier than it would be if they had 17, because they only had 5. But can you imagine going to management, explaining to them that the reason we have to do this is because we have our data in a bunch of different places. We don't know where they are and which one's correct. Again, the amount of time and effort that your knowledge workers spend trying to figure this type of a problem out is absolutely mind-boggling. So let's go to a definition now for reference and master data management here. And again, this is making sure these 5 activities that we described at the top of the hour here are consistent with supporting these golden versions of this. Specifically, it's control over, from a reference data management perspective, I should say, it's control over the domain values. Again, the vocabularies that include standardized items, code values, unique identifiers, making sure that we have consistent business definitions. What do you mean by a customer? And I can tell you that lots of organizations get confused between the various flavors of customers. One of the easy ones that's pretty straightforward to figure out is, are they a current customer or a potential customer? Each of these are important. Each of these are, we have to make sure that everybody knows. When we send a list, we send an advertisement to our customers, we don't tell the people who bought something yesterday that the thing is now on sale today. We also want to make sure that we have processes in place that make sure these are consistent, that they are shared, that they show up timely so that when somebody looks at the customer information, it is current relative to the business needs, and that it's relevant to the various ways in which we classify and organize data across these. So our reference data focuses specifically on the domain values. Now again, just one more piece of this. If I say that the domain value for the vocabulary consists of the numbers 0 and 1, then we have to make sure that those values are the only values that are allowed in the entire system, everywhere, and that no other values can show up other than 0 and 1. Master data management, then, is control over the master data values that enable consistent shared contextual use across all the systems. Different from the domain values, remember the domain values are the 0 and 1s. Master data makes sure that the record for Peter is consistent across the entire organization. So if my record as a customer is one place updated, we want to make sure that it doesn't happen anywhere else and that we know what controls are in place. By the way, just use of this strategy in your data management environment will help you to reduce the costs of compliance with rules and regulations, because if you have fewer places it can be changed, the auditors will be extremely pleased, and it means that your audits will be a whole lot easier to comply with. Let's look at a specific example of reference data now on here. Again, this is the idea that data is used to classify other data value domains. And again, it could be an order status. The order may be new or in progress, closed or canceled. The 2-digit United States Post Office state code abbreviations for my state is Virginia. And here we have an example of reference data sets where somebody has put in the value GB for the value of the United Kingdom. Several of my colleagues were off at a conference in the UK last week, and if they had called it GB, most people there would have gone, huh? Because they know it as the United Kingdom. So one part of managing your reference data as a part of mastering your master data in the organization is not to allow people to put in their own values. Now, it's not a big deal to go in and switch all of your GBs to UK if you know where they all exist. But again, in many organizations we have many places for them, and if we don't catch them all, that data pollution will continue to hurt our overall data management environment effectiveness. So let's look at master data now. Again, this is data about the business entities, giving us, but not necessarily limiting to predefined values in this case. For example, the business rules allow us to go in and say, hey, a business rule should be that nobody can, in fact, enter their own code for a country, that we have to pick them off of a pick list. Again, we've got our typical pieces there of parties, locations, things. This really comes from the term master file, which originated in data processing as far back as the 1950s. And the way to think about this conceptually is to say that I might have a master data file that might start out my balance in my checking account with a bank at the beginning of the month. If I have a balance of 100, whatever units I'm measuring, I would then apply the checks against it and apply deposits back in favor of it, moving the balance up and down, and those would be transactions against that master. And at the end of that month or day, again, depending on what my periodicity is, the master record file would have my balance updated. So if I had written 3 $30 checks, but then added a deposit of $20, my new master file balance from 100 would now be 90 minus 30 plus 20. Again, I hope that's real clear. If it's not, please ask us some questions, and we'll dive into it when we get to the Q&A section. Let's look at another reference data versus master data scenario that occurs in many organizations. The control over the standardized vocabulary. The reference data here might be, and this was a case that we actually did in under Canadian law, which by Canadian law at the time we were working on it made you maintain 9 values, possible gender codes that we had here for the Canadian Social Security system. The FBI has adopted this system as well. You can see them: male, female, formerly male, now female, formerly female, now male, uncertain, won't tell, doesn't know, male, soon to be female, and female, soon to be male. The existence of those 9 values would be the reference data that we're going to maintain. And in fact, just a little side story, but in this particular case, the vendor who was doing the data conversion only tested for male values and assumed every other value was female. In other words, if male, else female. Very bad programming standards. They actually lost the case on the value of that particular piece alone. If they had been properly implementing reference data as part of their master data management strategy, they would have looked for the standards the organization had already adopted with respect to its reference data regarding gender codes, and would have known they had to test affirmatively for each of those values, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And if we didn't fall into one of those categories, then pop it out as an error. That would have been best practices around that. Now, when we move from that to master data says that the golden value, right, the value in this case for my record, Peter, would be that I am male. So again, master data would contain part of that reference data in there. Both of these provide context for the transactional data that we use. So hopefully you have now good definitions of reference and master data. Again, reference data are the domain values allowed by your system, and master data incorporates that reference data into it and talks about the master values shared across systems for, in this case, the people, places, and things that we are keeping track of on an organization-wide basis. Okay, now let's move to the next section. Why are they important? Well, the first one are a series of facts that we need to talk about, which is that when we look at how people are doing this overall, the state of the practice, it's generally poor quality reference data. And since this reference data impacts many other things, the reference data then becomes pollution that goes into it, into the rest of your data environment. Similarly, master data shows up equally as poorly. So we look at homegrown solutions that then the regulators come in and say, oh my goodness, you don't have good control over these values, and because you don't have good control over them, risk management needs to be emphasized at a much greater level of importance than it would be in a more governed environment. 31% of the firms that we've surveyed around this area still manage data local to the application, which is a major, major problem. This means that when new and changing regulatory requirements come into play, these respondents have to go back and examine each system, which means, again, from a compliance perspective, the cost of complying with these regulations are much more problematic. Now, I'm not advocating that you implement master and reference data management practices because of regulation, but as a nice, happy outcome of that implementation, your ability to comply with the regulations will be much, much improved. Instead, what we really should recognize is that generally data management has been done poorly, and that if we want to reduce the rot associated with our legacy data environments, and rot stands for redundant, obsolete, or trivial data, we need to do some strategy in place, and this is saying, since the reference and master data affect an awful lot of the transaction data, it gives us a stronger leverage point to address it at this level than trying to get with every individual piece. Again, just put on your hat and say you're the typical organization that has its customer data in 17 places. How do you know where to go and fix it? Now, this brings us back to a point that I made earlier, which is that we really should be doing this in a context that is a coordinated effort. I've never seen a master data initiative succeed that didn't also have a quality piece. In other words, whenever I've seen people implement master data management as a technology where they spend lots of money on a tool and some techniques, but forget to put in place the governance and quality aspects of it as well. And again, for your organization it may be different, but absolutely quality is key to looking at master data. They are so integrated, it's just not worth dealing with them separately. What this means then is that if you don't do these things as an integrated effort, if it's simply seen as a technology push, the effort will fail. Now, let me bring a couple of points around that. Microsoft, in its SQL Server product, has put in the concept of master data management into it. It's built in. It's a wonderful set of technologies. We use them all the time. Many of our customers use them all the time. And every other vendor has done some similar types of integration work, so it's not particular to Microsoft. But once again, we see an awful lot of organizations that go in and just turn on those features of SQL Server and think that that's going to solve their problem. First thing you have to do is go in and clean up the data that's out there because you know it's not in the shape you'd like it to be in, and then you have to put in place governance practices around there so that the organization knows that it is a people, process, and technology play, not simply a technology play. Here's another example that we did for one of our customers. We were looking with them and talking to them about how metadata integrated with all of this. Now, if you've listened to my governance seminars, you know that I have a statement that metadata is the language of data governance. And so that metadata then goes off and involves the quality engineering activities that need to examine the operational data and pull out the master data from it. And they wanted to go a step further, and they were actually looking at knowledge management practices. Again, I present this chart just to show you what your organization might want to look for. Here's another one with the same caveat here. Again, in a governance context here, you might have the governance looking for violations of monitoring for various violations of governance in here, monitoring for quality, and monitoring to make sure that the master data is in fact working. So these two charts here that I've given you, this one and this one, are for your reference that you can take away on this to look at your organization and see if these things are useful for it. The articulation was quite helpful to our customers here, and they found it very, very useful, so we reproduced them for you. Let's talk how this comes about. And again, when we're talking about the importance of this, it really is critical to understand that nobody does this intentionally, but what happens is well-meaning people build different applications over the years. Again, the payroll people may have built theirs, the finance people may have built theirs, marketing, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, when we do that, each one of these comes with their own stack of data associated with this. We call these data silos, and this works terrific. However, if they all use a different definition of customer, then we have a reconciliation problem, and that if we don't fix that reconciliation problem before we attempt to integrate, we will end up with a major mess on our hands. Just so that you know, the main way that people evaluate the game Twister is by not falling down, which is a relatively low standard. We'd actually like our organizations to succeed. Let's look at another example here, which is what I call the tanks example. Now, the tanks example is kind of infamous because it leads to a couple of stories. on this. The first one is that an organization was looking at controlling their vocabulary because they found out that a software package that they bought, a financial accounting software package, counted every transaction of petrol being moved from one tank to another as a retail transaction. The organization was then faced with the prospect of modifying or customizing this financial package so that it would work with every organization, or controlling their vocabulary so that they knew when they talked about a specific tank what they were talking about. So here were two tanks, excuse me, here were two tanks that did count as retail sales, putting something in an end user form for taking it home for your lawnmower and, of course, putting it into your automobile, but that the transfer into this tank, the truck, did not count as a retail sale, as did transferring it to the refinery, as did the boat tanker that takes it from wherever the oil was harvested and brought in, or in this case a sky tanker, where all of these things were important for this particular organization. And by controlling these and by putting identifiers on all of the ones except for the end user consumer ones, they were able to in fact implement a strategy that allowed them to better manage their master data around this. The things that they were dealing with were the types of tanks. In addition to that, we don't want to confuse those tanks with these tanks because they are two different types of tanks. However, both do consume oil on a regular basis. And finally, we have tanked here at the bottom, whereas an individual who has had too much of whatever the individual was drinking on this. So again, the message here is by controlling this vocabulary through the use of master data management strategies, supplemented with some technology, you can now better control. And more importantly here, they saved a lot of money on this process by simply not going in and customizing the heck out of their specific environment here. Now, let's look at how that might look from a reference data architecture perspective. First of all, you have on the left-hand side your business data stewards, who are the ones that are responsible for the vocabulary. I'm going to go back away from the oil metaphor and go back to the gender code metaphor. The data stewards would determine that, in this case, Canadian law said they should maintain 9 gender codes, and that whenever they brought in any external data, they would make sure that that data conformed to the code that they had put in their code management system. This moved then the reference data into the database of record, the place where these things were stored, and that the transactional systems would read this reference data off of this reference database. That information may or may not get extracted to a warehousing type operation and off into data marts there, but the goal of it is, of course, central recognition, central management, central governance of these reference codes that were out there, allowing individuals to have a simplified environment and to say, I'm sorry, for every gender that we get, we need to be sure it's only one of these 9 codes, and to make sure that it is, in fact, at least one of these 9 codes that we have in there. Now, when we move from reference to master data, it's a very similar process. Our systems of record update this master data management collection here, which represents that golden master of the release, the golden record of the customer, the one that knows that I am a good customer of that particular bank or whatever business problem you're trying to solve. It's that truck on the road, again, whatever the particular piece is. The other online systems then extract those values and use them in their processing. So hopefully you can see that even though this is not trivial, this is much less complicated than the interrelated system thing that I showed you a couple of slides back, where everything is trying to be reconciled with everything else. Again, we may also have a warehouse that we extract these from and put it in places. So when we look at the combined master and reference data architectures here, what we're really looking at is a system that controls 2 distinct things. One, what are the allowable values that certain fields are allowed to take, gender code, different customer types, perhaps some other things related to that. and what are the values that our master data has that we're going to pay attention to, because we need to make sure that all of our systems are reading essentially from the same sheet of paper. So you can see here the theory is that you have a data cleansing layer around a master data hub, making certain that the data that is in those golden records is cleaned once and put in place so that we don't have it get repolluted from that. That's the governance aspect of it. So again, the cleansing and governance are absolutely crucial in order to look at these things in here. Again, then all the various databases that are accessing it are accessing only the best version of this in order to do this. Now, just so that everybody is focused on this, how well are we doing? And I love this particular comment from Fred Cohen here, where he looks at it and says we are achieving 180% failure rate. So let's look. 99% of those that implemented their data programs are less than fully satisfied, and 70% are less than just satisfied. That's a problem. When we look at that in particular, 76% of them can't track and have no consolidated governance of their spend on this. They don't know where they're spending their money. 25% of the clients in reference data is wasted on duplicate data. Now, again, if you're down to 25%, you've made significant improvement over the average, but it's still not a good record. 74% still have siloed data, which means more expensive cleansing management and ineffective distribution. On the 64% are planning to re-architect their reference data in the near future. So the first time it didn't work, and they're now going to do it again. If I were to examine these things and had time and effort and things like that, I would lay very good odds that they implemented it as a technology spend first and then tried to put governance and quality in afterwards. You cannot architect in quality and governance after you've implemented the technology. It doesn't work. Over half of these organizations spend more than $4 million a year on reference data. That may or may not be important for your organization, but it's a tangible, sizable amount of anybody's budget. So what happens? Well, again, 30% are regarded as outright failures. Many of them are implemented in service-oriented architecture contexts, and 70% of those have failed to yield the benefits as well. 80% of the initiatives fail because of ineffective leadership, because it's implemented as a project, that MDM is seen as the warehouse or as an ERP. It's an IT effort. It's separated from governance and quality and implemented with inappropriate technology. And finally, internal politics and silos implement the understanding of it. And you can probably sympathize with this as well. If you look, and can you imagine having an elevator conversation with an executive and they say, so I hear you're going to implement something called MDM. What is it? You need to be able to articulate to them and say MDM is an attempt to get our handle on our most important data so that we can cleanse it first and work on the rest of the data afterwards. By the way, that's probably not the exact pitch that you want to give them, but figure out where in that pitch you do want to deliver the business value for them, because if you're not able to articulate that value, it's going to be seen as just another IT project that executives don't have to pay attention to. Now let's shift gears for just a little bit here and talk about business processes, because we've talked already about governance and quality as related efforts. It is absolutely crucial that your master data management initiatives complement your existing business process architecture. And most organizations do not understand this or even try to manage this. So we have access now to some very cool technologies. A company and colleagues of ours in Finland have developed a reverse engineering business process discovery tool. It helps you to understand a holistic perspective of what your business processes are and how they are performing. I'm not doing a particular commercial for them. They're good friends, and it's a great product. But what I want you to understand out of this is that it is crucial to you to understand how your business processes work, because if your customers don't understand the inputs, you will not have a good understanding of your processes. I'll show you a very specific example of the mismatch on this, but of course the results are that you speed up your process analysis, that you better understand the cost savings, that you're easier to achieve your compliance, you're getting to your desired output increases that you have. And finally, you need to document your IT systems at a very good level, so you get a lot of benefits from doing these two things simultaneously here. Again, from an MDM perspective, it is critical that they match the processes. Let me give you a very concrete example. Many people understand the way in which a traditional motor engine runs, gasoline, diesel-driven, something along those lines. And for years and years, we've tried to come up with an alternative. And that was because we didn't understand that the best alternative was the one that was invented by Toyota, which is, in this case, the Prius engine here. So what I'm showing you is a little demo where it's a little hard to see in the lower left-hand corner. That is the fellow's foot on the accelerator there. And what you see is that the electric motor runs, and then it runs in conjunction with the engine. So that the goal was not to replace the electric engine, but to complement the electric engine. And I'm very thankful Toyota's done that, because it's worked out very, very well for me. You can see both the electric motor and the engine are running now, and they go back and forth. It's these micro-fine adjustments. If Toyota had tried to make this simply a replacement for the engine, we all know how well electric cars have worked up to this point. They're getting better, but we're not there yet. I saw something wonderful on the web the other day. It was an electric motor for your bicycle, so that it could actually take your bicycle and you could just put on a new tire on your bicycle. There's a good example of somebody understanding the process piece on this. So again, the lesson from this is to absolutely make sure that you understand what business processes you are trying to integrate within your master data management strategy. If you don't understand those processes, you have very little hope of getting this right. So let's look at some goals and principles around the whole concept here. Again, if you get on the elevator with the executives and they say, so what's this MDM stuff? If you can say, well, provide an authoritative source of reconciled high-quality master and reference data, they're probably not going to get that. But that is, in fact, our goal, which is to say that we want to provide good quality data to the processes, the business processes that need it, in a manner that is sustainable, so that we won't just clean it up one time and it'll get worse again, but it will, in fact, stay clean once we have cleaned it as well. This also, of course, lowers the cost and complexity through reuse and leverage of data standards on this. I have one organization that I'm working with right now that has run out of store numbers. And that is such a unnecessary event for them that they are seriously re-examining a number of things in their organizational practices, because the business is just appalled at having to spend money because they ran out of store numbers on this. Finally, we do want to try to get us towards these business integration and analytics type initiatives that we're moving towards. All of this will help. Here, again, our activities are to understand reference and master data integration needs. If we don't understand what the needs of the organization are, our technology solutions will be unable to help them as well. We also need then to understand the sources and contributors to these various master data management strategies here. And again, many of those are going to come from your various software applications as well as your business process architecture. We then need to use this as a part of our overall data integration architecture. Again, the concept here is that we have a data architecture. Our architectures are generally unhelpful if we don't know how they are used. Once we have uncovered them, they can be helpful, and we can then see where master and reference data management strategies would be helpful in the organizational processing of that. We then, of course, want to implement reference and master data management solutions. Sometimes it's as inexpensive in your organization as upgrading your copy of Microsoft SQL Server. Again, not a commercial for Microsoft, but they've done a terrific job with that piece. Sometimes it's a matter of buying some separate hardware on this, but most organizations have SQL Server somewhere in the organization already, so it's a great place to go and take a look. This also means we're going to start to try and define the various rules governing the use of our reference and MDM activities. I gave you an example earlier where we're simply going to use two values, 0 or 1, to represent the state of one variable organization-wide, and that may or may not be something that's useful for your organization, but you're going to have to develop similar rules in order to do this. You're going to have to start to establish golden records. Of the 17 places that you maintain customer in your organization, where are the ones that have the most probability of becoming good in your organization? Now, I mentioned customer earlier, and I mentioned that there's a hierarchy that we need to put in place, which is the customer breaks down into at least two different types of customers for most organizations. One of the customer types is your current customers, and the other are your present customers. So that's a hierarchy that we can pull out of this and say we're going to use that hierarchy for this for the organization. Of course, like everything else, it's never as easy as that, and if you've got somebody who thinks that is an easy job, ask them where in the hierarchy the concept of ex or former customer needs to be. Is that part of a current customer? Is it a former current customer that is no longer and moves into a potential customer? Or do you in fact want to advertise differently to people who have been your customer in the past and might be good customers again in the future? We also then need to plan the implementation of different data sources into our overall master data management architecture to do this. And finally, almost finally, we need to replicate and distribute these stacks of master data so that they are accessible to everybody else. Again, through service-oriented architectures is where we're seeing a lot of organizations do this. And finally, we want to put in place governance changes so that when people do update the reference and master data, we know exactly where they're going and what they're going to do. It also helps us to size and scope various projects around this. So let's look at a couple of things that we're going to investigate as we're trying to answer the questions that were on that previous chart. Who needs what information? Sounds pretty reasonable, but it's really good way to formalize this. By the way, the Zachman framework is a great framework for organizing this type of information. What data is available from what sources? In other words, certain software packages, applications, data feeds bring in certain types of data. If we can formalize them and understand where they are, we can have a much better approach to organizing all of this. How does the data from the different sources differ? And if it isn't the same, why are we either paying for it twice or maintaining it twice? So again, a formalized process around trying to figure out which is the best source and then putting in place a governance, a quality initiative to clean it up, and a governance paradigm to make sure that it doesn't degrade in general. We, of course, need a way of reconciling inconsistencies, too, as part of that quality place. And then finally figuring out how, when we do have valid golden variables, where we are going to put them, where they're going to end up, and how they are going to be shared throughout the rest of the organization. The deliverables out of an MDM initiative are quality around various types of cleansing services that we need to have, around the idea of understanding what are the requirements for master and reference data. And here I would give you a bit of advice and say, even though you may uncover 100 different requirements for reference and master data, keep them all in mind, but only implement them in a series of discrete phases that you build over time. Again, crawl, walk, and then run, rather than trying to do the big bang approach. You will need data models and documentation. Your modelers can be very helpful because they probably have a good idea of the change frequency of the various data items that you have and the provenance, the origin, the derivation of where that data came from. This will give us the ability to deliver to the organization reliable reference and master data to allow us to start producing records that have a golden lineage, and finally that we can start to put in place a series of data quality measures and reports. Of course, this involves major groups of people in your organization. You will have suppliers that will consist of some sort of committee and business data stewards. Again, they are indispensable from a governance and quality perspective. You will need to have your subject matter experts around this, your data consumers, your standards organizations. People have to keep an eye on what's going on out there in the world, and your data providers, and that you'll have various consumers and participants in the process. It is not a trivial process, but it is also doesn't have to be a big one. My guidance earlier to you, again, start small, crawl, walk, and then run. Find a couple of places where master data can be useful in your organization and see what you can do to implement that as a discipline instead of as a technology. Speaking of technologies, one place to go for lots of guidance is your ETL environment. If you have one, if you have ETL, it has a ton of metadata that will give you quality rules and other types of transformation rules that you'll need to have around there. That you look at your reference master data applications. There's a lot of them. Again, I mentioned I was out at IBM Information on Demand conference last week, and there were an enormous amount of tools and techniques. Spending half of an afternoon around that entire floor that they had set up gave me a ton of good information about how people are approaching this problem from different perspectives, which means you have a number of different choices that you can look at from both the reference and master data perspective. Again, the various modeling tools, you probably have some in your organization already. You may not have process modeling tools already, and those are important. Again, even if you're just going to put them in PowerPoint, make sure that they are able to be stored somewhere in something we call either a metadata repository, or the way I like to refer to it is as a metadata repository-like functionality. You don't need the repository, you just need something that works like it so that you can implement it well. So again, it's not prerequisite that you get metadata repositories in place before you implement this, but it is important that you understand the process modeling components of it. But when you do that process modeling, let's make sure we keep these things. Another set of technologies here that are very useful are data profiling tools. Again, some wonderful opportunities that we have there to take a look at the various profiling tools. There's some great cleansing tools that we can look at out there, integration tools, business rules, and process engines around this. Finally, we need to have change management in there, because if we don't keep track of these changes and roll out the next version of this, it will be very, very difficult. Again, it's something as simple as knowing which ICD-9 codes were in place when you collected the data in your healthcare application, because if you don't have the right ones, then you will have a mismatch between your various disease codes that are there. So these are the various building blocks that we have. Let's look now at the guiding principles around this. First of all, shared reference and master data belong to the organization. I would go further than that and say it belongs to the business rather than IT, because most of IT has not been concerned with these things in the past, but people still see these things as IT-led initiatives. So it is a challenge for us to figure out where this goes. It helps if you have a data governance organization in place that has an absolute decree of where the responsibility is. One of the things I like to do with my various groups that I'm working with is make a sign and put it on your desk and say, I'm responsible for all master data management in my organization. Because pretty soon somebody will come along and say, oh, who told you you could be in charge of all that? And what you do is you hand them the sign and say, here's your sign. And by the way, if not me, then whom is responsible for this? If we don't have that responsibility, it's going to be a big difficulty. Second guiding principle here is that these goals, whatever they are, cannot be achieved by one project alone. So manage your expectations carefully. Make absolutely certain that everybody understands this being a strategy is something that's going to continue over a multi-year period. It's going to require multiple types of investments. And again, it is not strictly technology. I've said that I'm sure too many times for you all today, but let's make sure that you take that one piece away, if nothing else. That we need to have stewards around, and that these stewards are accountable for determining the process of deriving golden values. Because if we don't have people in charge, it won't work. Again, let me give you an example from the meeting I was in just yesterday morning working with a transportation-oriented organization. Each of these VPs had been well socialized by the data management group to say that, this data is particularly important to sales, this data is particularly important to logistics, et cetera, et cetera. And they got the various vice presidents of this organization to agree that that data was of particular importance to them. And then they said, well, who's looking out for it? And the answer was, of course, nobody in particular. So they stepped up and funded some data steward positions. These data steward positions have this written into their job description and work as a liaison between IT and the business to make sure that the data that's important to that aspect of the business is governed by somebody with some good knowledge, skills, and ability about this. That these golden values that they were going to put forth then represented the best sources of information about all this in the organization. That they were only allowed to make copies from the golden source, and that those copies would not be duplicates, but they would be replicated. Duplicated means somebody's made a copy. Unauthorized, replicated is the code word we have for an authorized copy, and we know that when we update this one here, that needs to be refreshed as well. And then that the reference data requires formal change management. If we don't have formal change management and you're using the wrong version, it's hard to blame anybody except for IT on that. All right, so we'll finish up here at the top of the hour here with 10 best practices around this. And everybody says active, involved executive sponsorship, but we really do have to realize that that means 3 meetings. We're not going to have much executive sponsorship beyond people showing up for 3 meetings. So during those 3 meetings, we have to make sure that some of the ideas that we want to have are in fact put forward. That the business, for example, should own the data, or the master data management, some people call it a customer data integration project. That we need to have strong project management and organizational change management skills in the organization that we should lean upon rather than trying to reinvent. We also need to develop this using a holistic approach. Again, I've mentioned it several times, people, process, and technologies in order to do this, because if we don't have it well balanced, it will be heavy on one side and therefore not sustainable. That you need to build your processes to be ongoing, repeatable, and continuous improvement. That's our maturity framework that we use here. It's another lecture entirely, but we could dive into that at some point if somebody wants to get into it. That management needs to understand the recognized importance of dedicated data stewards. If we don't have them, we cannot succeed with this. To understand how implementation of a hub model integrates with your internal and external sources. This is your data architecture. Again, if you don't understand it, it can't be useful to you. If you do understand it, it can be very useful to you. You've got to resist the urge to customize, because this discipline is very, very new, and it's very likely the technologies will be changing rapidly. So if you customize anything in there, you're going to have to recustomize every implementation, and it runs the risk of non-compatibility moving upwards. Again, staying current with whatever the patches are. And then finally, and this would have been a great thing for the healthcare.gov people to know, right, test, and test again. So we're very much at the top of the factor. There's just a couple of success factors here. Again, if we do this with better knowledge of the users, it's more likely to succeed. Again, crawl, walk, and then run. Manage your expectations. Make sure that you have somebody that understands information architecture, governance, alignment with the business vision, and using a strategic framework so that we can go through and evaluate these things. We need to have that high-level sponsorship. You need to create a vision that says this is how we're going to move forward, that you understand the various hierarchies that we can measure success in this context with, that we use a business case to do this, to determine a decent return on investment, get the business to propose the critical process indicators in there, and that you measure the system before and afterwards, because otherwise you won't be able to show any result. And finally, translate those measures into specific financial results. on this, and that everybody needs to work together on this. And I'm going to finish off here at the top of the hour with just a quick 42-second example of how one company, British Telecom, sold this initiative within their environment. One of the best articulations I have seen about the business case for doing this. It's a wonderful piece. We actually have that on our website if you'd like to grab a copy of it. BT told us you were welcome to do it. So here's what we've talked about today. Again, inputs, activities, deliverables around this entire discipline, strategic discipline of master and reference data. We're at the top of the hour, and I will turn it back over to Megan for your questions. As always, we've got references in here for you guys to take a look at on here. And again, we'll go to the Q&A section. Megan.
All right, thanks, Peter. That was a great presentation. Now it's time for our Q&A. So time for you guys to ask your questions. So just click on the Q&A window. It's at the top of your screen. You should be able to submit your questions through that, like the Q&A window. So we'll just give it a minute or two so you guys can get your questions.
You said you'd also accept Twitter input as well, Megan, right?
Yes, Twitter as well. So if you guys want to submit that way, we will see it and get your questions answered.
I should play that BT music again. It's so catchy. I always dance when it's on.
There you go. All right, and we'll get started with the first question. First question is, what are some pitfalls or technical pitfalls that I can anticipate with MDM?
The technology actually works quite well, so I don't think you're going to encounter things that don't work with the software that people sell you. I think what you may encounter are different expectations about how things work. For example, one of the companies I work with is got a very large volume of things, and their initial calculations showed that they would need approximately 4,000 feeds on a daily basis of some of this MDM stuff. And one of the vendors said, gosh, we had planned for 40. So there were two orders of magnitude separating what happened on this. It turned out, interestingly enough, that both were off, and they were able to meet in the middle at exactly 400 in there. So the vendor looked, and they had been relying on a component of Windows that didn't perform as well as they wanted it to, so they replaced it with a more robust component in there. And when they did that, they were able to increase it to 400. And the business actually, even though they started out with these we're going to need 4,000 of them, when they did a good, proper analysis of it, that actually came down quite a bit. And so they were able to meet happily in the middle. I don't know that everybody's going to be able to do that. But again, the fact that both groups were planning and doing analysis around this was really much more important. So again, the technologies that you're going to see are going to work. The question is, will what they deliver work well for your environment? So it's up to you as much as it is up to you to question the vendor to know what's going on in your environment and whether or not that's going to make suitable use of the technologies.
All right, and next question is, reference data usually is defined as a code and description. What is the data? What do you feel the data type for code should be? I keep them numeric if list is too long, and I guess it's character if list is short.
So it's a great question. It really would be inappropriate for me to select that for anybody else. But as a general rule, let me go back to that set of slides there that we had. The question is a really good one because your organization may in fact decide in its reference master data strategy here that the codes should actually be codes on here. So again, maybe they're going to use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 for gender codes. You can see, at least in this schema, it might be a little difficult if they relied on initials. For example, M would be male, but then male soon to be female also falls into that category. It's kind of like the post office tried to do with our state codes. They really didn't get it very well in there. On the other hand, if they'd asked us to memorize that Alaska was the 50th state, or was it Hawaii, I forget, and put them in sequential order that way, that would be a burdensome for the user. So really what you have to do is look at your environment, and if your environment can support something that says that all codes need to be numeric in here, and that way gives you better testing against it and fewer inputs and again, higher quality data on that, that's a perfectly reasonable way to go. But I would do that not as an IT edict, but as a data governance edict, so that the folks that you're working with on the business have a chance to weigh in and feel like it's not being imposed upon them from the outside. Very interesting question, pretty detailed. I hope that answers your question.
All right, and the next question is, can you please re-clarify difference between reference data and master data management?
Sure. Thank you for pointing out I didn't do a good enough job on that, and I just happened to be at the right slide here. So reference data is the data that you're going to allow a variable to take. In other words, on this slide, this organization has determined that gender code, the variable gender code, is allowed one of 9 values. It must have one of 9 values, and it must be only the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. For this organization, that represents some aspect of reference data. You will have potentially tens or thousands of these in your organization. If you get much more than thousands, you're probably not doing enough consolidation on this. So the reference data says what are the values that are allowed the value to be obtained to. So, for example, if you decide that the value for shipping state can only be the continental United States, then we are saying as a business practice we can't ship to Hawaii and Alaska because they aren't part of the continental U.S. So your reference data there would be restricting the shipping state to the continental United States. Master data then are the general places, things, and locations that people keep track of in your organization. I'm going to flip back to that slide on there. And the idea here is, of course, that what we're trying to do is, trying to get to the right one here. There we go. Parties, places, and things in here. So a party can hold some reference data, as in what would be the gender of that party. But the party itself, the information about the party, again, the customer, the prospect, the employee, whatever it is we're trying to manage at that high level, is going to be the golden master in there. So again, you'd want one place to maintain information about your employees, one place to maintain about your customers, one place to maintain about your trading partners, one place to maintain about your vendors in there. So that is the difference between reference and master data. Reference data are the values that the variables are allowed to pick within your master data, within some of your master data items, but it is just as important to manage your reference master data as it is to manage your master data. Again, if that's not clear, please come back with another question. Thank you for asking that one.
All right, great. And the next question is reference data just code values? How about external vendor data like customer demographics? And is it appropriate to say master data candidate is a subset of reference data candidate?
Yes, to the last question. So again, reference data is a category of your master data, and that's probably something that would have helped out with the explanation, so it's a good articulation of it. Let me go back to my implementation chart here, which is a very nice one, and they actually said some of the aspects of it here. So if we have this architecture set up, and I'm doing the combined reference and master data architecture here, and we have external data coming in from let's pretend we're bringing it in from Nielsen, for example, because we're doing some demographic surveys or some things like that. I don't have it shown here on the chart, but Nielsen may use a different set of reference standards than we use internally. And therefore, it is important for the organization to say, good, are we going to use Nielsen's data, or are we going to use our own internal ones? And that shouldn't be made as a decision by IT alone. It should be made by a joint IT business process as part of the governance process in here, so that when that external data comes in, it is then made to conform, or we make all of our data conform with the external data. Now, of course, it's a real easy decision. If you're getting from multiple external places and they use conflicting reference data, then your only choice is to go to either one of those or to make up your own. But you can't ignore the problem, which is where a lot of organizations try to do it. Or worse still, they try to correct it on a system-by-system basis instead of on a programmatic, holistic basis throughout the entire organization. Again, very astute question on that.
All right, the next question is, given that there are many enterprise applications, few of which are going away and each requires reference data, often in different contexts, then question mark is the question.
So it's a good question, and I think I know the sense of this. If I don't get it right, again, please give me some correction on that. But what we're really trying to do is to look at our organization overall and to say, you know, this is the way most organizations look internally because they've grown up over time and they have different types of data, different sources, and we're all trying to connect it up and to make it work. Our wonderful legacy environment here. MDM is a strategy for trying to gain some control over this. So this goes back to my implementation guidance that I gave earlier on here, which is that most organizations, when they look at this, they say, fix it. Well, I'm sorry, a big fix is probably the wrong answer here. If you take instead and say, let's try to do master data management and reconcile just the finance data and the payroll data in this environment and get that to work really, really well. Let's get some experience with the tools, the technology. If it's the first governance instance that we've had, then by all means, let's use this as a good platform for trying to figure out what it is our governance group needs to be focusing on here. And then we'll extend it to include the marketing data. Now, the reason the questioner was asking this is because they've heard from multiple sources that when you go in to replace systems with a new system, only half of the old systems go away. So again, if I'm looking at an ERP system that is going to replace 12 systems in our legacy environment, and everybody's assuming the ERP is going to take care of all of that work, turns out that at the end of the project, only half of those systems actually go away. So a very big challenge, and that is why the questioner, I'm sure, asked the question in that way. We know we're not going to get rid of all the old systems, so what strategy can we have for trying to make that more manageable? And because it's a new technology, let's work it in gradually. Again, crawl, walk, and then run in terms of the implementation, as opposed to I'm going to fix everything at once and it'll all be done.
Okay, great. And the next question is, reconciliation among various applications is undertaken on a piecemeal basis versus a holistic basis. These are prioritized, funded, not as a whole, and funding goes to those who blatantly lie about it. I don't know if that's actually a question, more than a statement.
Megan, you're going to have to read that one again. I interrupted you by laughing at that, but I think I know where the question is going on here. So give reconciliation.
Oh, okay. Among various applications is undertaken on a piecemeal basis versus a holistic basis. These are prioritized, funded, not as a whole, and funding goes to those who blatantly lie about it. I think they were just making a statement there. So.
Oh, well, that's fair, but
Yeah.
it does speak to the importance of having some measures in place. I really don't like to use the word metrics. You notice as I was going through the slides, I almost always substitute the word measures instead of metrics in place, because a metric is really something that's an absolute, and we don't have many of them in there. But the question is a good one. For example, the finance data on this chart may be really messed up, but fixing it may be something that can be done by adding another finance clerk up there to just work with data. And the cost of that finance clerk at let's just pretend even $100,000 a year may be far less than the cost of implementing an MDM solution to fix the finance data. So it is critical, and I think that's what the questioner was asking, is that if you have these measures, then organizations can actually make priority decisions. But if people don't bring correct information to the table in terms of their return on investment and things, it's going to be very, very difficult for a manager to make a reasonable decision. Two examples of that. One, I was working with a group at one point, and I had developed a very careful business case that we thought conservatively would return the cost of the MDM solution in a 3-year period. So it was a pretty good return on investment. And the CEO looked at me and said, I know your numbers are conservative, I know you believe in these numbers, and therefore I believe in them, but I've got a salesperson over here who's selling me some additional software, and they're telling me this software will return 25% return on investment in a much shorter time than you're doing. And even though that individual is probably lying to me, I have to believe that I have to use that individual's information to do this. Now, what I did in this, and this is point 2 of this, is to say, great, when somebody makes a promise in your organization, your IT audit group can actually run around behind them and do this. Now, I have seen this work in a couple of organizations. It's kind of tough. But if you can imagine somebody standing up at a meeting and saying, if you'd give me X number of dollars, I would return to you lots more than X number of dollars in savings as a result of my investment in this technology, and having an audit person in the room stand up and say, the last 3 times that this individual has stood up and made you a promise, they have been 100% accurate. So you can believe in these numbers, probably more so than perhaps just a random individual standing up and doing this. The same group will stand up and say, somebody else will stand up and say, well, if you give me Y dollars, I'll return to you Z savings on this. And that individual could stand up and say, the last 3 individual projects that this person tried to do and promote failed miserably. So again, it's an internal auditing of those numbers and trying to keep track of it. Very few organizations have a desire to do that because it does require somebody to get confronted with good news or bad news situations. But these 2 organizations I'm describing to you actually know who they can trust when they say this is going to work or this is going to achieve results. So it's not an easy task, and I think that's what the questioner was getting at. But if you do come up with your own numbers, and we'll throw in a little plug for my book here too. I've got a new book out on Amazon called Monetizing Data Management that actually shows you how to calculate some of these numbers. It's a wonderful set of contributed stories that we have in here. And more importantly, the book is short enough your boss can read it on any plain flight length. It's a very short read for them. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to make the plug, and I hope I answered your question there on that.
All right, great. And the next question is, please give examples of 3 good elevator pitches.
Elevator pitches, excellent. And these are not going to be ones that are good for you, though. I mean, what you really need to do is to know your environment and to be able to say, by the way, there's a bunch of the elevator pitches in the monetizing book, but the idea is to say, look, the reason we need to have better control over our data in finance is because we keep paying people twice. I don't know how many of you have had the fortunate situation of working for the federal government. I worked for them for about 7 years during an early part of my career, and they did overpay me on a regular basis. It just puzzled me. I never did understand it. They had some bugs in their processing. I'm not sure exactly what the problem was in there. But if you can make this so that at least your CFO is going to say, okay, paying people for work they didn't do is generally not a good thing. So that's what you have to make your elevator pitch into. In fact, anytime you're communicating with the C-levels in your organization, you're going to have to put it in the terms that they discuss. And in most cases, it's going to be money. So that your elevator pitch will be, we spent, let's just make up a number, we spent $250,000 last quarter paying people twice, and we spent another $50,000 that quarter cleaning up the mess that we created as a result of it. So $300,000 is what your current ongoing monthly cost is for having this bad finance data. If you'll allow me to implement this solution, which is going to cost somewhat less than $300,000, I will have the problem fixed for you in a year. Again, I'm making that up. The point is, I could make up elevator pitches all day long. You're the ones that are going to know whether they work for your organization or not, and that's the important part of this. By the way, if you have trouble creating those, give us a call. We love to work with organizations and help them. We've actually helped a number of organizations who just give us a call and say, I'm really having trouble figuring out how to sell this thing to my boss. We have great conversations around that.
All right. It looks like that is all the questions we have for today. Thanks, everyone, for all those great questions, participating in today's event. We hope you have enjoyed it. Thanks again to Dataversity and Shannon for hosting us. Once again, you will receive today's materials within the next 2 business days. Our webinar next month will be Unlock Business Value Through Document and Content Management. Hopefully you'll be able to join us for that as well. As always, feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you, Peter, and thanks, Megan, for this great presentation, and thanks, as always, to our fabulous attendees who are so interactive and for their patience as we got the link fixed today. So thanks, everyone. Hope everyone has a great day.